I never imagined I would spend Christmas with my arm in a cast, surrounded by relatives who looked confused, while the man I raised laughed about my pain as if it were entertainment. I had spent years swallowing disrespect and cruelty to keep peace in the family, especially with a daughter-in-law who wielded manipulation as easily as she wielded cutlery. But when she crossed the line from insults to violence, something inside me snapped, not physically, but emotionally. I stopped begging for acceptance and started collecting proof. So when the doorbell rang that night, it wasn't a coincidence. It was a consequence. My name is Lillian Mercer. I'm 69, and I never believed I would live long enough to see fear inside my own home, fear not of strangers but of family. I raised my son with tenderness, taught him empathy, and trusted that marriage would bring him joy, not cruelty, into our shared lives. But when his wife entered the picture, control seeped quietly into routines, comments about respect, subtle isolation, and rules disguised as structure. I convinced myself it was cultural differences or stress or expectations. The denial numbed my instincts. I swallowed discomfort because confronting it felt like failure. I didn't realize silence wasn't keeping peace. It was fueling danger. The earliest signs were small enough to ignore: sharp remarks masked as jokes, criticism buried beneath smiles, and demands framed as household expectations. She monitored conversations, corrected tone, and made it clear that the home ran by her rules alone. She questioned chores, dictated meal choices, and belittled preferences. It wasn't physical but emotional erosion, day by day undermining self-worth. She brushed off disrespect with just teasing, and he followed, shrugging off concerns. Yet beneath polite gatherings and family phone calls, hostility simmered. The tension intensified quietly, making her second-guess every movement, every word, every attempt to bond. The unease became constant, like walking on glass. Whenever she attempted to discuss mistreatment, he brushed it aside with impatience, claiming exaggeration, misunderstanding, or oversensitivity. He insisted his wife was just strict, traditional, or high standards, turning her pleas into weakness. He defended control as discipline and minimized emotional abuse as household order. The more she tried to express discomfort, the more he withdrew. His silence wasn't neutrality, it was alliance. Watching him become a stranger didn't happen overnight. It happened in increments, a shrug here, a smirk there, until one day his loyalty was clear. He stood by cruelty, not compassion, and each dismissal chipped away at trust. Control escalated under the guise of structure: chores assigned with deadlines, curfews set like she was a child, and punishments for perceived disrespect. She wasn't allowed to sit until guests arrived, speak unless spoken to, or rest before others. She convinced herself obedience might restore peace. But discipline wasn't the goal, domination was. She learned that tone mattered less than compliance, and affection was conditional. Her independence faded, replaced by routines dictated by fear of consequence. Gaslighting made her doubt memory and judgment. She questioned if she was overreacting exactly as intended. She was no longer a mother-in-law, she was property. The breaking point came the night before Christmas. She offered a suggestion about decorations, a harmless comment. In response, tempers flared, voices rose. Her daughter-in-law accused her of disrespect, undermining authority, and causing tension in the home. The argument escalated into threats, quiet, controlled, and terrifying. She tried to leave the room, believing distance would diffuse tension. Instead, she was blocked, cornered, and physically intimidated. The daughter-in-law grabbed her arm, not to restrain but to assert dominance. The grip tightened, twisting until pain shot through bone. It was not a lesson, it was violence. And it broke more than her arm, it broke the illusion. She sat in the emergency room surrounded by strangers, explaining injuries she dared not fully disclose. She mumbled about falling, slipping, or tripping, stories victims often tell themselves as much as others because truth feels dangerous. Doctors noted inconsistencies. Nurses exchanged glances. The cast wrapped around her arm wasn't just plaster, it was evidence. She left the hospital with painkillers and pamphlets about domestic violence, silent acknowledgments from professionals who recognized patterns she wasn't ready to admit. The ride home was quiet, filled with dread. She knew the moment she crossed the threshold, denial would resume. But something inside her shifted. Her silence transformed into strategy. She realized words alone wouldn't protect her. Proof would. She purchased a small recorder, discreet enough to hide in clothing or place near conversations. She practiced using her phone camera without drawing attention. Medical documents were organized and stored securely. She began journaling incidents, dates, phrases, witnesses. She didn't seek retaliation, she sought safety. Evidence became armor. She understood that abusers thrive in private, so she prepared to bring truth into the open. Christmas dinner wasn't just a holiday, it was an opportunity, and she intended to arrive not as a victim, but as a witness. When relatives first noticed the bruises peeking from beneath her sleeve, concern flickered, but only briefly. Their questions were shallow, their sympathy surface level. When she hesitated, they interpreted her silence as exaggeration. Some suggested she was clumsy, others implied age made her more fragile. The broken arm became gossip, not alarm. She saw the discomfort in their eyes, not because they feared for her safety, but because acknowledging abuse meant confronting someone they liked. It was easier to minimize than believe. Their dismissal stung more than the injury. Pain fades, betrayal lingers. She realized that silence wasn't the only weapon her oppressors used. Indifference was another. The most painful blow didn't come from the hand that twisted her arm. It came from the son who once ran to her when he scraped his knee. He laughed about the injury, calling it a little lesson, insisting she was dramatic and asking for trouble. His tone wasn't defensive, it was proud, as though violence proved loyalty to his wife. He used humor as cruelty, turning her pain into a punchline. She saw relatives laugh nervously, unwilling to challenge him. At that moment, the boy she raised disappeared. What remained was a man molded by control, intoxicated by dominance, and blinded by loyalty to the wrong person. His mockery cemented her resolve. When she arrived for Christmas dinner, cast and bruises visible, the room fell into uneasy silence. Someone asked if she needed help cutting food. Others avoided eye contact, pretending nothing was wrong. The daughter-in-law fussed over the table settings, smiling sweetly, masking hostility beneath politeness. Her son spoke loudly, steering conversation away from her injury. The family acted like the broken arm was an inconvenience, not a red flag. She tried to engage, but every sentence was cut with uncomfortable laughter or dismissive gestures. The dinner table, once a symbol of unity, now felt like a stage, each relative desperate to maintain the illusion of a happy family. Denial was the unspoken dish served. She played the role flawlessly. She refilled glasses, complimented outfits, and spoke about charity work, crafting the image of a devoted wife and caregiver. When guests asked about the cast, she feigned concern, suggesting that stress or dizziness caused the fall. Her performance was convincing, and sympathetic nods followed. She placed a gentle hand on the injured arm, pretending tenderness while her eyes glinted with victory. She controlled the narrative effortlessly. It wasn't just manipulation, it was a strategy. She knew that credibility is the strongest weapon, and she wielded hers with precision. Watching the room believe her lies was agonizing, but it also confirmed the necessity of evidence. As the evening unfolded, alliances formed. Some relatives rallied behind the daughter-in-law, calling her devoted, responsible, and patient. Others sympathized quietly with the injured mother but feared confrontation. The family fractured, not because of the injury, but because acknowledging abuse meant choosing a side, and choosing a side meant risking comfort. She watched friendships dissolve and whispered conversations erupt. Every glance carried judgment. The room wasn't divided by truth, it was divided by cowardice and convenience. She understood that she couldn't rely on family ties for support. If change was going to come, it would come from outside the walls of this home. She slipped the recording device into her coat pocket, activating it before entering the dining room. Her hands shook, not from fear of being caught, but from the weight of what she hoped to capture. She positioned herself so casual conversations could be overheard. She asked subtle questions, prompting responses without drawing suspicion. She didn't need confrontation. She needed a confession. The recorder wasn't revenge, it was protection. It would validate her pain and expose cruelty masked as control. She didn't know if the plan would work, but she knew silence hadn't. It was time to turn their arrogance into evidence. It happened almost casually. Her son, emboldened by support and ignorance, replayed the previous night's events like a joke. He bragged about how his wife taught her a lesson, twisting her arm to put her in her place. The daughter-in-law smirked, adding that disobedience has consequences. The room erupted with nervous laughter, but the recorder captured every word, tone, phrasing, intent, all preserved. It was the confession she needed, not coerced, not prompted, voluntary. Their arrogance became their downfall. As they laughed, she felt no satisfaction, only confirmation. The abuse was no longer a secret. It was evidence. She waited until the house was quiet, retreating to her small room with the door locked. Bruises throbbed, but fear sharpened her focus. She dialed the non-emergency police line, choosing her words carefully. She didn't rant or accuse. She reported facts, dates, injuries, behaviors, explaining she feared retaliation. The officer on the line didn't dismiss her. He asked questions, patient and methodical, and she felt heard for the first time in months. She mentioned the recording she planned to collect at Christmas dinner, and the officer advised her on legality, caution, and documentation. She hung up trembling, not from fear, but from the realization she wasn't powerless. After an initial review, a domestic violence officer contacted her again. He explained the severity of her claims and confirmed that, if evidence was obtained, law enforcement could intervene directly. She requested a discreet presence on Christmas night, knowing the son and daughter-in-law's arrogance would only speak with witnesses. The officer hesitated. It wasn't protocol for social events, but after hearing her plan and reviewing medical reports, he agreed to position himself nearby, ready to enter when called. She provided the address, layout of the home, and names of those present. She felt a flicker of hope, not escape, but accountability. She approached neighbors and acquaintances, people who had overheard shouting or witnessed her limping on previous occasions. She didn't ask them to pick sides. She asked them to confirm facts. Some were hesitant, afraid of involvement. Others admitted they suspected something was wrong but didn't want to interfere. With gentle persistence, she collected short written statements, simple observations of bruises, harsh words, or prior confrontations. These weren't emotional pleas. They were corroborating evidence. She knew relatives might lie or deny, but neighbors had less to lose. Their testimonies formed a safety net, transforming her accusations into a pattern. She retrieved her hospital records, the x-rays, and the doctor's notes describing the fracture. She requested a copy of the emergency room intake form, where the staff had documented her inconsistent explanation and observed behavioral red flags. She highlighted details, making sure nothing appeared exaggerated. These papers were undeniable proof, scientific, dated, objective. She filed them with the police report and kept duplicates hidden in her purse. For the first time in weeks, she felt grounded. The injury was no longer just pain. It was evidence. Evidence that would speak even if she couldn't. She consulted a legal advocate who specialized in elder abuse cases. Rather than sensationalize, the advocate broke down her options: protective orders, charges of assault, and potential civil claims. The process was overwhelming, but she listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions. She learned her silence had rights attached to it, and those rights were enforceable. The advocate warned her that court battles would be messy and emotionally taxing. But she didn't hesitate. She wasn't pursuing revenge. She was pursuing safety. Her resolve deepened. Christmas wasn't just a holiday gathering anymore. It was the beginning of legal consequence. As the dinner unfolded and the air thickened with arrogance, the moment arrived. The doorbell echoed through the laughter and clinking utensils. Conversations halted, heads turned. Her son's grin widened, assuming holiday guests had arrived. She didn't rush. She reached into her coat, gripping the recorder with steady fingers. Her heart pounded not from fear but from anticipation. She looked her son in the eyes, seeing confusion flash briefly. Then she spoke softly. "You asked what happened." "About to find out?" She stood, walked toward the door, and exhaled. The plan she had built piece by piece was ready to unfold. She opened the door with practiced calm. The officer stepped inside, uniform crisp, expression unreadable. The room shifted from confidence to panic. Her son-in-law, no, her son, stammered accusations of misunderstanding. The daughter-in-law cried, but the officer wasn't swayed. She handed over the recorder and he played the confession aloud. Gasps erupted. Silence followed. The officer matched the recording with her medical records and witness statements. The facade shattered. The abusers realized too late that their arrogance had been documented. The officer announced there was sufficient evidence to proceed. The dinner was no longer a celebration. It was an intervention. The officer stepped forward, placing handcuffs on her while reading her rights. She tried to twist the narrative, claiming she slipped, that the injury was accidental, that the recording was out of context. But the officer remained unmoved. Her son argued angrily, but anger is not a legal defense. The room watched in shock as the woman who had dominated the household was escorted toward the patrol car. It wasn't dramatic, it was procedural, calm, controlled. The neighbors who had gathered outside saw not a misunderstanding but accountability, and for the first time she felt the weight of her silence finally lifting. It wasn't vengeance, it was validation. He refused to believe the consequences were real. He shouted at officers, insisting they were overreacting, demanding they release her immediately. He blamed his mother for ruining everything rather than acknowledging abuse. His disbelief came not from love, but from entitlement. He had grown accustomed to shielding her actions, convinced manipulation was authority and violence was discipline. Now, stripped of control, his panic surfaced. He grasped at excuses, stress, misunderstanding, provocation, anything except truth. Watching him crumble was painful, not gratifying. She didn't want him destroyed. She wanted him awakened. But denial is a cage, and he clung to it. Relatives who once laughed nervously now stared at the floor, replaying moments they dismissed, her bruises, her silence, her hesitation. Guilt settled heavily. Some apologized, stumbling over words they should have spoken months ago. Others avoided eye contact, ashamed not of their disbelief but of their convenience. It was easier to side with power than vulnerability. But now power was in handcuffs and vulnerability stood with evidence. The realization was jarring. They had enabled abuse through silence. Their attempts at comfort rang hollow. True support would have meant courage earlier. She didn't scold them. She let their own conscience speak louder than accusation. Outside, Christmas lights cast eerie shadows as neighbors gathered, drawn by police cars. They watched quietly as the daughter-in-law was placed in the back seat. Whispers spread, questions, speculations, then understanding as details trickled. Some recalled moments when they sensed tension but ignored it. Others admitted guilt for not intervening sooner. A few approached her gently, offering sincere concern now that truth was undeniable. The spectacle wasn't entertainment, it was a community awakening. Abuse, once hidden behind closed doors, now stood under flashing lights. She didn't relish the attention, but she recognized the power of visibility. Secrets lose strength in daylight. Within hours, she was escorted to the station to issue a formal protective statement. A judge reviewed the evidence, the recording, medical reports, and witness accounts. Given the severity, a temporary restraining order was granted immediately, preventing her daughter-in-law from approaching or contacting her. It was a document, yes, but it was also breathing space. For the first time in months, she felt the possibility of safety. The officer explained next steps, hearings, testimonies, potential charges. It was overwhelming, yet empowering. The restraining order didn't erase damage, but it drew a legal line that could no longer be crossed without consequence. With assault confirmed, attention shifted to the welfare of children in the home. Child Protective Services initiated an assessment, interviewing neighbors, teachers, and family members. Patterns emerged: strict discipline, emotional manipulation, isolation. The investigation wasn't punitive, it was protective. Her grandchildren became the focus, ensuring they were not learning that violence was authority. She cooperated fully, offering insights without bitterness. The outcome was not yet decided, but the possibility of shielding them from the same cycle gave her strength. Abuse doesn't just harm victims, it teaches by example. And breaking that example mattered more than revenge. He wasn't handcuffed that night, but he didn't walk away untouched. As evidence was reviewed, it became clear he had witnessed violence, encouraged it, and dismissed medical treatment. His words on the recording, boasting about teaching lessons, shifted him from bystander to participant. Prosecutors discussed charges of enabling abuse and failure to report assault. He clung to the belief that marriage protected them, but law doesn't bend to ego. For the first time, he understood that loyalty to cruelty carries consequence, not because he was married to the abuser, but because he became one in silence. Because what happened after the arrest didn't end the fight, it only began the reckoning. Like I'm asking you to subscribe, you can feel the final twist coming. The courtroom atmosphere was stark. No holiday lights, no excuses, just facts and accountability. The recording played, medical professionals testified, and neighbors confirmed patterns of aggression. Her attorney attempted to paint her as stressed, overwhelmed, misunderstood, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge emphasized that elder abuse is not a family dispute. It is a crime. When the verdict was announced, guilty on charges of assault and intimidation, she didn't cheer. She simply exhaled. Sentences included jail time and mandatory counseling. It wasn't a triumph, it was a consequence. The courtroom didn't restore the past, it protected the future. And that mattered more than winning. The son's fate unfolded more slowly. Investigators reviewed his involvement: laughter during confession, failure to prevent injury, refusal to seek medical help. The court determined that while he hadn't physically assaulted her, he enabled abuse. Temporary loss of parental rights was not revenge, it was a safeguard. He had to complete counseling, anger management, and demonstrate genuine accountability if he wanted reinstatement. Watching him face consequences was painful. She didn't want him destroyed, she wanted him changed. The ruling wasn't a punishment for loving the wrong person. It was a warning. Enabling violence is not loyalty. It is complicated, and complicity carries cost. Temporary custody shifted to her home, a modest apartment filled with warmth, not wealth. The grandchildren arrived confused, frightened, and unsure who to trust. She didn't overwhelm them with explanations or bitterness. She created a routine: breakfasts at the table, gentle conversations, supervised visits when allowed. Slowly, fear loosened its grip. Laughter reappeared, not loud or forced, but timid and healing. She didn't try to replace their parents. She protected them from echoing learned violence. Safety became the priority. Stability became the gift. The home was no longer a battleground, it was a refuge. As part of sentencing and rehabilitation, the judge required a public apology, acknowledgement of harm, not as humiliation but as accountability. Standing before the court, her son and daughter-in-law did not speak from arrogance. They spoke from consequence. Their words were strained, hesitant, and monitored. The apology didn't erase trauma, it recognized it. It wasn't forgiveness, it was an acknowledgement. Those listening understood the difference. The statement, recorded and entered into court documents, marked a pivotal shift. Abuse was not a private matter, it was a public mistake. And admitting that wrong was mandatory, not optional, Once admired for their discipline and strong family values, the couple became symbols of deception. Schools, workplaces, and social groups distanced themselves. Invitations vanished, respect evaporated. People who once admired strictness now recognized manipulation. The community didn't rally around vengeance, they rallied around awareness. Workshops emerged, conversations sparked. The issue of elder abuse, once whispered, became discussed openly. Their downfall wasn't a spectacle, it was education. A reminder that cruelty festers in silence and thrives on denial. And reputation, built on fear rather than respect, crumbles quickly. Rather than retreat into quiet relief, she transformed her experience into advocacy. She helped found a small network, support groups, legal resources, and emotional counseling for older adults facing abuse. She shared her story not for sympathy, but for solidarity. Survivors found strength in her resilience. Professionals, social workers, lawyers, medical staff joined efforts. The mission wasn't to punish families, it was to protect vulnerable individuals. Her past pain became someone else's lifeline. She realized justice wasn't only legal, it was communal. And empowerment, she discovered, was the opposite of silence. In her final reflection, she understood a truth she once feared. Family is not defined by DNA. It is defined by safety, respect, and shared humanity. Her son may one day change. Her grandchildren already are. And she no longer measures loyalty by tradition, but by compassion. Justice didn't restore old bonds. It forged new ones with neighbors who helped, officers who listened, and survivors who understood. She did not win by retaliation. She won by refusing to stay silent. Her story ended not with revenge or reconciliation, but with clarity. Family is chosen through actions, not titles, and she finally chose herself.